So in true bunny fashion, Denzel did not want to be in this video today. He is snuggled under the couch like a loaf, so that's where he's going to stay. But he's been having some health problems going on. I know I've mentioned it in a couple of short videos so far, but I wanted to give you a full breakdown when I had more information. So hopefully this provides some valuable insight to what it's like taking care of a bunny and some of the problems that they may face. So if you've been following us for a while, you may have seen me take Denzel and Sully to the vet probably a year ago because Denzel was peeing on himself. I couldn't figure out how or why it was happening, but he kept peeing on himself. Denzel and Sully are both litter box trained. They do not have any accidents, so Denzel consistently uses his litter box with no problems, and we clean that litter box at least once, if not twice a day. So it's a very clean litter box. So when he first started having this pee issue where he was peeing on himself from time to time, I tried out a graded litter box just to see if that helped at all, where I thought maybe if he was raised up a little bit, it would keep it from getting on himself. I don't know. It really ended up not helping much. So we tried it out, but still had the same issues. So we decided to go to the vet. I take Denzel and Sully to a local exotic vet and I explained to her what's happening. You know, Denzel's peeing on himself from time to time and it's always on his left side. And I was worried that I wasn't able to keep him clean enough and I didn't want him to get an infection or, you know, have some sort of skin issue go on top of him peeing on himself. So the vet did a physical exam as well as an x-ray to see if there was any kind of blockage or maybe urine sludge, and it came back all clear. And Denzel wasn't acting any bit different. He acted completely normal. He wasn't hopping differently. He was eating normally. You know, everything was normal except for this pee issue. And we left the vet that day with the vet telling us that sometimes this just happens with bunnies. She said that sometimes bunnies are just shaped in a way, I suppose, that makes them pee on one side or the other, and the best I could do was just to try to keep him clean when it did happen. And that's what we did for the last year. Like I said, it was very rare when it would happen, so it was completely manageable. If I ever saw that he had pee on himself, I would clean it up and we would both be about our way. That is until probably a month or two ago. So I noticed that he peed on himself. Again, it's always on the left side, and I cleaned him up. And then later that day, he peed on himself again, and I cleaned him up. And then later that day, he peed on himself again. And it just became this very vicious cycle of so many days back to back to back where he just peed on himself probably every single time he had to pee. And I just couldn't keep up with cleaning him. I was so worried about his skin getting irritated. It did eventually get super irritated. Bunnies can develop urine scalding, where if urine is in contact with their skin for too long, it'll actually start burning their skin. And that's kind of what started happening. I just couldn't keep up with cleaning him as often as the urine was getting on his skin. So I put some Vaseline on the area to try to create a barrier so it wouldn't keep getting wet. Honestly, it was happening so much that made no difference either. We ended up pretty quickly going to an emergency vet when one morning I had woken up and his skin was just soaking wet. He must have peed on himself countless times throughout the night. His skin was very red and very irritated, so we went to the emergency vet right away. This was another local exotic vet, but not the same one that said that was, you know, the reason why he was doing it before was just that he was shaped that way. So they take Denzel and Sully, because Sully's his emotional support, to the back and they check him out. They ended up clipping all of the dirty fur. At that point, especially that morning, I didn't even bother with getting him cleaned up. We just, you know, threw him in the car and wanted to get there ASAP. So his skin and fur was very dirty and kind of matted at that point. So they clipped it all off, cleaned it up. He was kind of hairless back there for a little bit. That day, they ended up sending him home with just some medication for pain and inflammation. It's called meloxicam, and he took that for a couple days, did well. He seemed to make some slight improvements. He did have a slight tummy problem, but that's a known side effect of this medication. So I was able to lower the dosage on that, and he took it just fine and did well. But a couple days after starting that medication and taking him to the vet originally, I picked him up one day to check him out, and his skin was so swollen in that area where he had been peeing on himself. It was very red and very inflamed. So we hopped back in the car immediately and ran back over to the emergency vet. When we got there and they checked him out, the vet said that he most likely had an infection. So this time, which is now the second visit to the vet we've had in just a matter of days, They sent him home with a 14-day course of antibiotics, as well as this topical cream that I put on the infected area a couple times a day. I may be totally wrong on this, but I think it's like a topical antibiotic, if I'm not mistaken. It's called an SSD cream. But again, this pain problem was his only problem. He was acting so normal. He was acting happy. Again, eating normally. He wasn't having any kind of accidents. They were trying to treat what had already happened, but I wasn't really getting any answers as to why it was happening in the first place, you know? And when it gets to the point where it was so frequent like it was, I couldn't keep up with it. No matter how hard I tried, if he happened to pee on himself overnight while I was sleeping, he was going to sit like that until I got up in the morning and checked him out. And that's obviously very, very bad for him. So I was constantly worried about him. You know, he was constantly having to get cleaned up, which isn't a pleasurable experience for him either. And neither of the vets that we had taken him to so far had any kind of answers or explanations. So they did recommend that if he hadn't seen any improvement on the new antibiotic, to check out a vet that was a couple hours away. So that's what we ended up doing. I was hesitant to take them there at first because it's just a long trip. You know, for any animal, that's a long trip, especially for bunnies, because it can be stressful. And Denzel and Sully are pretty used to riding in a car and going out and about, but that's still a very long trip. But you know, I really felt like we had no other options. It's what had to be done to be able to get any kind of answers, because Denzel just couldn't keep going on like he was. Even from the first time that I called this new vet on the phone to schedule the initial appointment, they already sounded much more knowledgeable of the issue. And when I was trying to explain to them everything that had gone on, that we had been to a couple other vets and hadn't gotten any answers, but you know, the most that we had was that, you know, some bunnies are just kind of shaped like this, and this is an ongoing problem that my bunny's gonna have for, I guess, the rest of his life. Well, they assured me, even in that first phone call, that that wouldn't be a diagnosis, or that wouldn't be the extent of what they would give us to go off of, you know, that they would really work on figuring out why this was happening and try to figure out a solution, as opposed to just continuing what we were doing. The new vet said that Denzel's urine problem could be a result of several different things, one being a possible E. cuniculi infection, which is a common parasite infection seen in rabbits. It could be a musculoskeletal issue. It could also be a urinary infection, urine sludge, kidney stones. She asked if we had noticed that Denzel prefers one side over the other, which could possibly indicate some sort of mobility issue. And you know, I said no, he acts perfectly normal, hops and binkies and lays and sploots and does all the normal bunny things on both sides from everything that I have seen. So we decided on this first visit to go with some blood work. They got a couple blood samples, and one was used to test the function of the internal organs. This one came back normal. The other blood test was for E. cuniculi, but that one had to be sent out to the lab, and we had to wait, I think, about a week for results. After the blood test, we went back home with the instructions to continue the antibiotic, I think, for another 10 days or so, as well as that topical cream, putting it on the infected area. And then we would go from there depending on the results of that E. cuniculi test. We could possibly do a urinalysis or some other imaging and testing depending on the results of that blood test. So we go home, we're continuing that medicine, and Denzel's continuing to do fine. And then we get a call about a week later with the results of the test. And this is where I'm gonna pull up my computer because I have to read some of this. It gets kind of technical. Denzel ended up testing partially positive for E. cuniculi, okay? So as best as I can describe it, it means that there's several different antibodies for the parasite, and there was a presence of some antibodies, but not all. So he's not 100% positive for E. cuniculi, but he's also not negative, okay? And with these results, the vet wanted to start treating him for E. cuniculi. And now I'm constantly learning new things about bunnies and their problems. You know, there's a lot of information. So I had heard of E. cuniculi before, but I thought that a telltale sign of E. cuniculi was head tilt. And I've seen bunnies, you know, their head kind of tilts over to one side. Denzel obviously didn't have any of that. I always associated it with the neurological symptoms, but turns out that's not always the case. And the infection can also present itself in urinary problems, which is possibly what was causing Denzel's issue. Apparently, 50% of rabbits demonstrate exposure to the parasite. Spores are shed in the urine, and infection usually occurs via ingestion of contaminated food or water, and it primarily targets the central nervous system, kidneys, and eyes. While neurological symptoms are the most common, like head tilt or circling or involuntary eye movements, not all rabbits will show neurological signs. Some rabbits are also just carriers of the parasite, and some are simply asymptomatic. And here's the fun part. E. cuniculi is contagious to other rabbits as well as humans. So we had to take Sully back to the vet once we got Denzel's positive results, and then Sully had to get tested for the same thing. While we were there getting Sully tested, they did send us home with some treatment. So how they approach a positive E. cuniculi test in a rabbit is by an initial 28-day course of fenbendazole. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He takes 0.48 milliliters once a day for 28 days. That also requires halfway through a blood test. So we went back a couple weeks after he started it just to make sure that his cell counts and everything were looking normally while on the medication, and they were. So he now just has a few more days left on this medication before he completes this whole 28-day course. Now, once a rabbit is infected with E. cuniculi, I suppose they can never actually get rid of it. So he will be on a treatment for this for the rest of his life, presumably. And this exotic vet handles it in such a way that they receive treatment every 6 months. So I believe 6 months from now, once he's finished this initial course, he'll be on the same medication again, just for a much shorter course, and he should continue that every 6 months. Here's a real kicker though. Sully's test came back negative. And so I don't know how that happened, but some bunnies, even after exposure, may just not become infected with it, or they don't show any symptoms. Sully's not showing any symptoms of infection. So, we're not gonna treat him for something he doesn't have. It could be false negative, but until he shows any kind of symptoms or indications that he has some issue going on, he will not be treated for it. And as far as Denzel's pee problems go, he really hasn't had any issues ever since this initial little outbreak situation we had a month or two ago. I did check him once, maybe a few weeks ago, and he had just a little bit of pee on his left side again. It's always the left side. But other than that, it was a very quick cleanup. It didn't happen again, and he's been good to go. Although Denzel tested positive for E. cuniculi, and it can present itself in a way of urinary problems, the vet also said that Denzel very well could have had a UTI. And once he was on those antibiotics, he started seeing some improvement because it was about the same time. So we didn't have a urinalysis done because we were going these other routes of testing, but he very well could have had a UTI and the antibiotics could have cleared him up. My only problem with that though is just that it happens sporadically sometimes. Over the last year, from the very first onset, when I very first noticed him peeing on himself on the left side, it would happen like maybe once a month here or there. Maybe it would happen on a Monday, and then it would happen on a Friday where he would pee on himself again. So I don't know how a UTI would really work like that, because it's not like you have a UTI one day and the next day it's gone, and then a few days later it comes back. And I also think that's really weird that with a UTI, it would make him only pee on the left side, I don't know, but I'm very thankful that he's doing better and he's been making a lot of improvements. So that's really all of the information that we have to go off of right now. I know it took me a while to do this update, but I was working with very limited information, despite going to see several different vets, and now this new vet that's a couple hours away. It's been an information overload in a way, but also I've been lost along the way, most of the way as well. So thank you for your patience, and thank you guys for caring for Denzel. It really means a lot to me to know that people are worried about him and asking for updates and everything. So I hope that all of this provides a little bit of insight, because I know bunnies are Bunnies are kind of complicated, and obviously there's not much known about them, even in the exotic vet world sometimes. It can be hard to find a bunny knowledgeable vet, so very thankful that we're at where we are right now, that Denzel's on his medication. Also, if you're interested in hearing how much bunny vet care costs, let me know, because oh my goodness, I do not even want to add those numbers up, but I think it might be interesting. And if you're wondering about Denzel, of course he's in the same spot under the couch loafed. Bye.